Good morning, everybody. Well, today is brought to you from the Town Place Suites by Marriott. Nicole and I decided to get out for a day, so let's take a look at what we got to look at. We are in Acts chapter 13. Oh, and I looked ahead. I did sneak a peek just a minute ago to see what we're headed up to. So this chapter is one of Paul's longest sermons, and so he's really preaching the gospel. And I think one thing we see in the book of Acts is he preaches a bit of a longer gospel, or at least a longer gospel gets recorded here, and we won't see it as much elsewhere. It'll just say he preached, and so we'll kind of get it from that. So yeah, as you guys log in, say hey, good morning. So good morning, Dad. So let's just start off in verse 14, because we only made it one verse yesterday, so today we'll catch some ground here. It says, "But when he departed from Perga and came to Antioch in Pisidia, and went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and sat down, and after the reading of the law and the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue sent to him, saying, 'Men and brethren, if you have any word of exhortation for the people, say on.'" And so this was a common theme in the way the Jews did church. They'd have their synagogue meeting, and they would do their reading, and see, Dad, Sarah said hi. And so if there was any itinerant preachers, traveling preachers, they would invite them to come and teach. And there's even a possibility that Paul the Apostle, or Saul of Tarsus, would have had a reputation that preceded him. And so these people may have known who Paul was, but they may not have known that he had become a Christian. And so people would invite anyone to come in and share. And so this is where the part of the sermon is, where it's like an open mic night. And Paul stood up and, motioning with his hand, said, "Men of Israel, and you who fear God, listen." So what we would find is different circles of people in the synagogue. This is what a normal synagogue setup would look like. And they're all a little different. But because it depends on if it's a small synagogue or if it's a larger synagogue. In a smaller synagogue, the Jewish men would be the inner circle. The Torah would be read from kind of the middle of the room, and then the Jewish men would be circled around that. Then they would have the women, and then even further, I might have these flipped, no, I think it's, and then even further, the God-fearers. And so, yeah, and it's just like the temple. There we go. So it is the women, then the God-fearers. And if you look at the temple, the greatest of all the, it's not a synagogue, it's the temple. And they didn't teach in the temple like they did the synagogue. It was actually different. But Holy of Holies is only where the high priest could go once a year. The holy place is where the priests who were ministering, like when Zechariah on that Christmas story in Luke 1, where he comes to bring the incense, right? Only when you had a job could any priest on rotation get into the holy place. Then there's a courtyard, right, of the priests. Then there's the courtyard of the men. Then there's the courtyard of the women. And then there was the courtyard of the Gentiles. So this was like all the different layers of their system. And so now in Acts 13 again, what it is that they would have the men, they'd have the Jewish women, all the Jews there, but there was also a bunch of people who had come who were interested in learning about the God of the Bible, but they weren't converted to Judaism. So here when Paul says, "Men of Israel, and you who fear God, listen," that's what he's doing. He's addressing those people on the outer circle. In verse 17 he says, "The God of this people Israel chose our fathers and exalted the people when they dwelt as strangers in the land of Egypt, and with an uplifted arm he brought them out. Now for a time of about 40 years he put up with their ways in the wilderness. And when he had destroyed 7 nations in the land of Canaan, he distributed their land to them by allotment." Man, I'm not going to take the time to go down that road, but I love the story of Joshua. Joshua is probably one of my favorite books. Joshua, Song of Solomon, a couple of my favorite books. I would just reviewing Song of Solomon the other day. Beautiful stuff. But Moses gets him out of Egypt, and there's that 38-year period of just wandering around. 40 years in total, including the other things that went on. So they get in Joshua, they conquer. Verse 20, and he gave them judges for about 450 years until Samuel the prophet. And afterward they asked for a king, so God gave them Saul, son of Kish, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, 40 years. And when he removed him, he raised up for them David as king, to whom he gave testimony and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who will do all my will. And that's where I wanted to get to. Maybe tomorrow we'll get to the actual gospel where it talks about from this man's seed we will get Jesus. But then there's this David, a man who will do all my will. Listen to that again, right? Do all my will. I don't normally get this close. It's amazing to think that the testimony of David is that he would do all of God's will. David, I think people jump right to Bathsheba, right? But there's a long road to get to Bathsheba. David would try and escape from Saul. It's funny, King Saul. And he would lie, right? He had to lie to one of the priests. Lying to the priest is going to get you in trouble. And so he lies to the priest, and he ends up getting Goliath's sword in the bread, right? And then he goes and he pretends like he's mad there in the Philistine territory. I mean, David does all these things, but his heart would keep getting turned right again. And then you find David serving the Philistines until finally the enemy comes in and wipes out and takes all the people away, and God restores him again and again and again. God was always so good to David. And then you see this situation with Bathsheba. And most of us all should be extremely familiar with David and Bathsheba, but let's just recap, right? It all starts with David staying home when the kings would go out for war. God told Adam, cursed is the ground for thy sake. Men without something to do get in trouble. I believe that with all my heart. When men have too much free time, they do stupid things. Women have their own problems, but men need to stay busy. And here's the thing, is that when David should have been out warring, he was staying home lounging. And lounging turned into voyeuring as he was watching Bathsheba bathe from the top of his roof. He takes her, he sleeps with her. I'm not going to get into the whole consensual, not consensual. Did she plan this? Did David plan? We don't know. But they knew each other. They were friends. That much I can guarantee you, because David was friends with her husband and her father. Her father and her husband were of David's 30 mighty men. So the mighty men, that was like a close-knit group of people, right? So you obviously know one of your mighty men's wife, and you know your mighty man's daughter. And so David knew her well. And so they sleep together, and to cover it up, right, what does he do? He first tries to trick her husband into sleeping with her because she gets pregnant, into thinking the baby's his. Even if he didn't finally go on to kill Uriah, how wicked is that, right? Where you knock up the guy's wife and then you trick him to think it's his kid. And so, he ends up killing Uriah, right? And the rest of his life, he has to deal with the repercussions of all these events. But at the end of the day, the testimony of David is a man after my own heart who will do all my will. And that's, again, it's mind-blowing that that's the testimony left behind, that he does all of God's will. And so you need to think about this, is that if David can have a testimony as being one who does all God's will, how much more can we if we just have a heart for God? Luke chapter 16, Jesus tells the Pharisees, God sees your hearts. He knows the thoughts of your hearts. And that's something that should both comfort us and terrify us simultaneously. We should be comforted knowing that when we fail, when we mess up, when we become like David, that God knows our brokenness. Everyone else might judge us. When you mess up big, when you fail big time, and you do something you never should have done, quite often the least sympathetic people are the other human beings in your life. And yet God knows your heart, how sincerely you desire to be right with him and to come back. But on the flip side, when everything looks like it's going great to all the people in your life, your friends, the church, everything seems fine on the outside, God knows your heart. And it's in those times, I think sometimes we're in the most dangerous place, because it looks like everything's good, and so we can act like everything's good, and we can even fool ourselves into thinking that everything's going okay. But God sees our hearts. He sees how much passion and love is there. He sees if there is zeal and how much. We can tell our friends, oh yeah, still going strong, and we can say some real pious words, when you can do a spiritual checkup on your friends, we all know what to say, right? I mean, we all have the right words to say. And the sad part is most often we can even fool ourselves into thinking that, oh yeah, I'm doing really good right now. Going to church, doing this and that. But taking the moment just to sit down and really pray like David. Search me and know me, God. Try me and know my anxieties. See if there's any wicked way within me. Lead me in the way everlasting. Having God search our hearts, because that's the problem, is that I'm not even able to discern my own heart. But God can. I think that's why prayer is so important, because it's during those times of seeking him that if we're willing to ask him to search us and know us, and then wait upon him to give us responses, then I think we can have the answers we're looking for. So, there's all that. Take and do with it as you wish. But I challenge you that you might not even know where your own heart is at. But if, like David, pray the Psalms, get into the book of Psalms and just read those prayers. What was it? This morning I was even just reading another great Psalm. I think it was 130 to 131 or 129 to 131 this morning I was doing. They were super short, but just simple prayers about just putting nothing else before God and just focusing on him and having him reveal to us what we need. So, God bless you guys. Have an amazing day, and I will see you guys tomorrow morning, 7:30, right back here.